checks out at $47.87. Tatis at $29.64. So I think that's supporting your point. I guess the devil's advocate argument for Tatis would be, we don't know what the ceiling is yet, too. Like, because not only did he pace out to something, again, it's dangerous to do the projecting the 60-game season onto a 162-game season, but he was pacing out for something like high 40s in homers and around 30 steals, and that's enticing, especially when you see that his approach improved quite a bit last year as opposed to his debut in 2019. I mean, he dropped his swinging strike rate, and he dropped his K rate, made incredibly hard contact. So I don't think it justifies a 5-pick difference in the first round. But if someone takes Tatis in the top 5, I totally get it. I absolutely get it.
Oh, me too. Yeah. Like, I don't want him at number 2. And we've talked about this. We talked about this at third base with Jose Ramirez. There's so much fluidity in the first few picks that really the first 5, 6, 7, 8 picks, I almost don't feel like there's a wrong choice. This is a year where it's like, okay, if you want to take Turner number 1 overall or Tatis number 1 overall, I don't think it's a big deal. And the argument against Turner, by the way, is just health. He's had one season where he's played more than 122 games, and he played 162 games that year. But, and I'm not saying, we know past injuries don't mean future injuries, but he's a hard-nosed player. He plays the game hard. He steals a lot of bases. He plays a demanding position. There's that possibility he gets hurt and misses like 20 or 30 games. And, it's not the end of the world. He can still produce a lot of value, but it's just something to think about if you're drafting Turner. So who else at this position do you want to talk about next year? I think really they're all interesting. I think Francisco Lindor is probably the most boring of the 3 in terms of what to talk about, because he kind of is what he is.
Yeah, I think Mondesi is the most controversial in the tier, obviously, probably the most controversial in baseball this season. About Lindor, I would just say quickly that I really like when he's going in the very early second round, so right around the turn. And I like Lindor especially if you grab a pitcher and Lindor as kind of the around the wheel of the first round, because Lindor gives you such a base in all the categories. So I think he's a good way to just kind of start filling your columns, with an all-around offensive player. Mondesi, however, I mean, this goes back to our discussion that we had in the Slack when you've posted the draft of your tiers. I absolutely get the argument for Mondesi. The thing is his game is so flawed at this point that it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around taking a player who is, and he's an excellent real life player. I mean, he's excellent defensively. Obviously, the speed is just off the charts. At the plate, the floor is so, I mean, there is no floor. The floor is a cavern going into the center of the earth. So, again, I see why he's in the 5-star tier, but maybe you can do a little more convincing for listeners who might still be skeptical.
Well, I'm gonna actually start out by saying that he is an awful player in real life. And I know I'm doing the opposite of what you just asked and making the case for him. But
I think awful I don't think that's fair. I think he's limited.
Okay. Well, I guess when you factor in his defense, he's limited, but he now has 1,200 major league plate appearances and a 1.9 WARP. And a lot of that, I know he had some negative, which is, part of that. And, that was in 2016 and 2017 and last year. But at his ceiling, he's a 1.6. His best years is a 1.6 WARP player. So that's okay. I mean, that's serviceable. And if that's what he can be, you're right. He's a serviceable major league player. And I guess that's kind of the argument for Mondesi, which is if he can be a 1.5, 2-win player in a Royals team that realistically, I know they made some moves and they just traded for Andrew Benintendi. They sent Carlos Santana. They've got some decent young players, but Mondesi would have to be really awful to lose his job. And, if he's a 1.5 win player, he's not going to lose his job. And the floor for him for that to happen, he'd probably have to, like OPS, like 500, 550 before the Royals looked and were like, okay, well, we got to pull the plug on this. Like
it's actually funny that you should say that, because he actually had an OPS on September 3rd, an OPS of 440.
Right.
And he was still playing every day.
So I guess the question there is like, how long and how bad would the OPS have to be? And, it was 440 on September 3rd, which was however many games in. So, if it was another month and he had a 440, it was like 60 games. I think that might be when the Royals might be like, okay, well, like this is awful. We have to pull the plug. But that kind of supports my point, John, which is
it does.
Mondesi is going to play pretty, barring injury, pretty much no matter what. And if he does play, we know he's going to steal bases. We know he has power. We can talk about how that power might be accidental and he's hitting bad pitches and running into fastballs, but he has the power. And the projection of the Axe, by the way, which is 17 home runs, 37 steals. It's actually different in the article because it looks like it changed a little bit. But 17 homers, 37 steals, 237 average. That's like the weakest projection by far. Almost every other system has him at or close to 2050. If he's a 2050 player, regardless of that average, again, unless it's like a 200 or 210 average, he fits in this tier just because he's not Turner, he's not Tatis. We're not saying he belongs to the top of this tier, but he's going to return second round value if he puts up those numbers. And that's kind of the argument for him, which is, maybe you're right, John. Maybe bad is a harsh term. He's certainly not a good real life player by any stretch. It's just that for fantasy, there's so much potential for him to return that value. I think, you mentioned Lindor at the turn and you kind of like him as that pick. I think one of the problems with Mondesi is that you kind of have to have a strategy revolving around him in terms of your batting average, I think. Like, if you draft Mondesi in the second round, you better make sure to get some batting average players later because, otherwise you could run into, like, if you take Mondesi in the second, for example, and, I don't know, Pete Alonso in the fifth, you're going to have some problems. And, that's where it kind of changes your team a little bit. Now, he's not Billy Hamilton, where, if you drafted Hamilton, it was a whole, I got to make up for power elsewhere and I got to make up for average. But yeah, there's some of that with Mondesi. And I got to be honest, the more I look at him, the more I kind of have cold feet about him in the second round, which means I probably won't get him.
I think it comes down to a stylistic difference because you can't argue with the value just in terms of the retrospective evaluation from last year and what the projected stats equate to for 2021. But then I just look at the swinging strike rate that's been above 20% for 2 years. I mean, his contact rate is in the low 60s. Like and I think about not necessarily him losing his job, but that can have a knock-on effect for not just for average, but for runs as well. If he's just not getting on base, no matter how many bases he steals. And if the power, dips a little bit, because the contact is so infrequent, like you said, it's running into the odd fastball and there might be more variance there with the power. So I don't just worry about, the average as kind of a trade-off for the steals. I think there could be a scenario where he stays in the lineup, but the other categories are dragged down so much that the benefit you're getting from the steals is offset. So it's just it's just not my style though. If you want to just pocket those steals and not really think about the category for the rest of the draft, like go with God.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: like, if you're in a draft and Mondesi's falling, like, what's the round or the point where you're like, okay, like I get it, like I don't like him, but I have to take the value here. I have to go with this pick. And, if he's a bust for me in round X, so be it. There's too much upside
Yeah.
on this pick not to take him.
I guess I start thinking about him maybe in the fourth,
Okay.
depending on what I've got so far for offense. Like I would give it a serious look see in the fourth and really think about if I could construct a team around that.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm, and we see where he's going in ADP. So
Yeah.
the odds are that in most drafts he will not come anywhere near the fourth round.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Like, I think if you're thinking the third, it's a different conversation because maybe you're in a draft where he falls, or a lot of people feel the way you do. But yeah, his max right now is 33 over the last month. Yeah,
Wow.
which pretty much means if you're not taking him anywhere in the second in a 15 team league, you're almost definitely not getting him. So that's where the decision point is. And I think to your point, and I've heard other podcasts talk about this, and we don't talk about this all night, but some of this decision point isn't just Mondesi. It's kind of the idea that people are taking more and more pitching up at the top. And so it's the idea of, if you take a pitcher in any of the first 3 rounds and you take Mondesi, now it's like, okay, well, I'm really gambling a lot on this one spot, on this one player. And I think the more inclined you are to take pitchers up at the top, the less you want your hitters to be gambles. Like, the less you want those hitters to be there, the more you want those hitters to be steady and not have a floor where you're like you're saying, oh gosh, there's a lot of floor in this player, even if he plays. So yeah, I think you've kind of talked me down off of Mondesi a little bit. I might push it more in like an AL only, like, whereas in a mixed league, I might kind of just shy away from this kind of profile. Speaking of shying away, does the possibility that Trevor Story gets traded mid-season make you nervous?
A little bit, and the fact that Nolan Arenado is no longer on the team also makes me a little nervous. I've never really been a Trevor Story guy. Like, I get it. I see the production year in, year out. I always worry that the average is fragile, even though he's hit well the last couple of years. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that in most drafts, if I get to the second half of the first round, that someone is going to be, or let me put it this way, that there will be players there that I feel a little more comfortable with than Story. That, again, that's not to say that, I mean, he is definitely a first rounder. Like, there's no question about that. But there is more uncertainty this year with Story because Colorado is a flaming dumpster fire. So
yeah, I would think, unlike with Mondesi, if Trevor Story, you mentioned Lindor, like at the turn, I'm thinking if you're, sitting there at 15 and Trevor Story is sitting there, you're probably gonna be like,
yeah,
I have my concerns, but taking Trevor Story at 14 or 15, at the back end of the first round, you would have no problems with. But you are right. Like, it's weird. Like, I like Story, but outside of an Otnu league I used to be in, I've never had him because somebody always likes him more. And I don't know if you remember last year, Story, I believe, was ahead of Turner in ADP, and we had this conversation. Like, I was like, I want Turner. Like, I don't want Story. Like, that was kind of my demarcation. My thing about Story is that, I agree with you about the average, and that's something that Coors like really helps him with. If you go back and look at his splits, like, he's last year 246 on the road, 333 at home. The year before, 328 at home, 260 on the road. I'm not going to do this for every year, by the way. I'm just going to go back one more year. 2018, a little bit better, 306 at home, 276 on the road. But that's my concern. I think it's a difference between like a clearly great hitter like Nolan Arenado versus a very good hitter like Story. I think the very good hitters hurt more by the potential move out of Coors. And one thing I'll say in Story's favor, he runs more on the road. So if he does get traded and he does wind up on another team, that's where the floor is helped a little bit. He could still steal 20 to 25 bases somewhere else. So it'll sting if he's traded in July, but you should get some steals and you should get some of that where you won't be completely busted if he's traded.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Should we go on to the 4-star tier?
Yeah, unless you're thinking about Lindor, but I think Lindor is just pretty, like you said, boring vanilla. I mean, for a
Well,
star
it's
player at least,
it's
he's
it's exciting that he's on your New York